I cannot believe that in 1978, we still have to tell our kids not to get into a van with strangers, especially if they're wearing a mask. Welcome back, horror fans. I'm Leo, and Bootube Breakdowns is here to save your scary movie night. Right off the bat, the Black Phone scores a 5.2 out of 10, landing it in our Ghoul Drool category. But here's the thing. I've already had to shadow box with a ghost in a serial killer's basement just to get you this score. And in a few minutes, I'll show you exactly why this film earned its rating. If you disagree with my score at the end of the video, be sure to let me know how much you want to get into a car ride with a ghost that helps you find the bodies of murdered children. And then be sure to like, share, and subscribe about it in the comment section. A shy kid named Finney finds himself locked in a basement by a masked predator known only as the Grabber, a man who mixes sadism with game show theatrics. The setting is the late 1970s, a time when kids vanished without a trace and the adults seemed powerless or willfully blind. The only lifeline is a disconnected black rotary phone that rings anyway, carrying the voices of the Grabber's previous victims, each offering fragments of advice, warnings, and half-finished escape plans. As Finney pieces their failures into his own survival blueprint, the story tightens into a slow war of attrition. The Grabber circling like a cat, the boy learning to strike like a cornered mouse. Outside, his sister Gwen stumbles through psychic visions that border on the divine intervention side of things, but the real weight of the film rests underground, in that claustrophobic room where violence and hope grind against each other. The phone isn't just a plot device, it's a chorus of the dead, forcing Finney to inherit the rage and finish what they couldn't. By the time the showdown arrives, the tension isn't about whether the boy survives. It's about whether he can carry the ghost's unfinished vengeance with him. Now, we've seen the escape a serial killer's fantasy story 1.5 million times. The interesting aspect of it, however, is how the ghosts of the victims are talking to Finney in order to strategize Finney's survival and plot their revenge. The story is balanced out between the dysfunctional dynamic of Finney and his family, the Grabber's twisted fantasies of slaughtering misbehaving children, and it's all held together relatively cohesively from the perspective of a 1970s middle school drama. We are given the perspective that he is a bit of a loser who doesn't fight back, and the story sort of evolves to the idea that he learns to fight for his life and stand up for himself against the Grabber. The survival aspect from Finney's perspective is interesting, but mostly he's an idiot. He spends the story just kind of sitting around and waiting for the ghosts to call him and try different ways of escaping. All before Robin calls Finney, gives him a 10-second shadowboxing session, which never pans out, by the way, and then he gets into a fight with the Grabber that conveniently ends with blunt force trauma to the Grabber's skull. The story is supposed to play out as if Finney grew up due to an unreasonably stressful event, and if he took some initiative at any stage of the story, it may have been successful. Instead, however, we get a story where a dumb kid in a basement waits around for ghosts to tell him what to do next. Also, his sister had magic dreams that existed only for the cops to show up at the end, and his abusive alcoholic father existed only to delay the magic dream plot convenience. I feel like it had potential to be a more interesting story, but overall it was just a little better than average in its execution. I give the story quality a 6 out of 10. I can overlook a significant chunk of plot holes thanks to how well paced this movie is overall. The movie is quick to show characters, build small-town 1970s Americana, and show how the town's looming and increasing fear of a child kidnapper and potential murderer is creeping in on them. And impressively, all of this was done by the 10-minute mark. We spend time diving deeper into the backstory of Finney and his sister Gwen, showing the dynamic between school life and an abusive home life. Finney is out in the streets the next day. He gets picked up by the grabber. And from this point on, the story bounces back and forth between Finney surviving the ordeal and backstories of the ghosts being explained through jump cuts back to the middle school. While not the cleanest of transitions half the time, it is definitely entertaining and allows you to fill the gaps while the relatively short time period of 3 days in that basement flies by. The abusive father plot is kind of ham-fisted in there for convenience. Max's scenes felt more like comic relief than actual relevant plot points, and the cops are complete morons that could have been cut out entirely and nothing would have changed. And even some of the ghost interactions were just kind of there. All things considered, its runtime at almost 2 hours was much longer than most tight horror movies, and I was never really bored while watching this. If I think about it too long, the movie is kind of a mess, but if I watch it for entertainment, it's way better than most. I give the pacing a 7 out of 10. The movie is definitely not a horror movie in a traditional sense. It works much more as a psychological thriller reworked as a coming-of-age story. Now, don't get me wrong, the grabber is definitely a menacing and unsettling presence, but we never really see him as anything more than a creepy caretaker that likes to cosplay and sleep shirtless in a chair. We get to see the ghosts of his victims, and they're definitely bloody, but overall its entire premise is, oh, he's a killer and you just have to use your imagination about it. Overall, as a kid, yeah, he's bigger and stronger, so he's a threat, but if this were another grown man, the grabber is kind of a weak build and not that menacing at all. Compound that with the fact that every ghost introduction was a cheap scare, just to tell the audience, hey, we want you to believe this is a horror movie. Look, ghosts. Boo, right? Yeah, it really all just kind of falls flat, and after a 3-point cheap scare deduction, fear factor lands at a pathetic 1 out of 10. Now, even though it is not that scary, I actually had a lot of fun watching this movie. The grabber was presented as a creepy child killer, and we never really knew what he was willing to do to his victims, but the playful aspect of changing the mouth parts from happy to sad, depending on his mood, was a fun way of depicting the psyche of the killer. I love the clever bit of how, as the movie progresses, his mask figuratively and literally starts to slip off as more and more of his face gets revealed. Meanwhile, the whole premise of the ghosts of his victims calling Finney to strategize his survival was a fun new twist, and I really enjoyed overall how it played out. I also really enjoyed the whole 1970s middle school aspect of the story. They really did a fantastic job of portraying just how vicious and violent the school politics of middle school children can actually be. Even though I gave this movie a lot of crap, my favorite part of the whole movie was actually Finney. If I look at it as a weak and scared kid that is just trying to survive day by day in his personal life before being forced into this absurd situation, there's actually a bit of charm to his lack of initiative in the whole thing. If I was kidnapped and trapped in a basement and then suddenly I learned that ghosts were real and they were trying to help me escape, I'd probably have a moment of existential crisis, as I'd have to completely reevaluate what is and isn't real. Now, there's a few hiccups here and there that I thought were more weird than entertaining, but overall, it's a solid watch that will keep you glued to the screen. Fun factor for me gets an 8 out of 10. I'm gonna be honest, the ending was so cringy, I rolled my eyes. Finney has had a crush on Donna, a girl from school that he's always wanted to talk to, but didn't have the stones to make a move. After the events unfold, Finney walks into his classroom, sits next to Donna, and talks to her. Cue the music, roll the credits. It's so dumb and cliche that I couldn't help but laugh at the ending. More questions are left lingering than answered once all is said and done. For example, we saw Finney bonk the grabber on the head and left him in a hole. but it is ambiguous as to whether or not he's dead or unconscious. The police scene didn't really give us any closure, and now that we know a sequel is about to hit theaters, I'm now wondering if the grabber's ghost is haunting an adult Finney, or if he's actually still alive. The convenient to all hell dream power that his sister had was never really explained either, and by the end the film said, it's a thing, don't think about it. And we're all just kind of sitting there like, yeah, okay, I guess. The plotline with their mom and the father's grief is completely forgotten, and the aftermath of the movie is never really discussing it again. Seriously, girl calls police and says, yeah, a ghost told me my kidnapped brother is in the basement of the house, and the cops were like, yeah, alright. They checked it out, found the bodies of the missing children. Conveniently, at the exact same time, Finney was walking out of the grabber's house, and the police reaction was like, wow, thanks, weird dream girl. Seriously? That's it? It was a dumb ending with an attempt to wrap it up as a happy ending. While it is not the worst offender in the way it was done, the film pretty much stopped taking itself seriously towards the end. It didn't anger or disappoint me, just kind of made me laugh at the lazy absurdity of it all. I give the ending a 4 out of 10. So that's Bootube Breakdowns' take on The Black Phone. Averaging our score gives this movie a 5.2 out of 10, which places it in our Ghoul Drool category. Do you agree with my rating? Scream your score in the comments and tell me what horror flick I should gut next. If this helps save your spooky vibes, smash that like, share with your horror crew, hit that notification bell, and subscribe to Bootube Breakdowns for more killer verdicts. Keep it creepy, and I'll haunt you in the next review.